Welcome back. You're listening to another episode of the What is Humans podcast with Shane Strunk and Dennis Kluba. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at What is Humans podcast, on TikTok at What is Humans podcast, and on YouTube at What is Humans podcast. Today, we're discussing tides of influence. Enjoy.
Hey, welcome. You're on the What is Humans podcast. If you're new to the show, the What is Humans podcast is a personal development podcast on conversations that Dennis and myself, Shane Strunk, have about everyday life. We find value in these conversations, and hopefully you can find value in them as well. And most importantly, we are experts in almost nothing. What's up, man?
Nothing much, getting into it, middle of the week, just getting ready for summer. It's a good time to have a conversation.
Yeah, totally. I just got LASIK too.
Yeah,
so
you
these
did.
Bright lights are fun on my eyes.
Yeah.
But you brought this topic to me.
Mm-hmm.
Where did this come from?
Yeah, I think that, so the topic is called Tides of Influence. And I think that we'll go a couple different directions, but I think that there's certain external influences that we can fall either in a good way towards or in a bad way.
Yep.
But I also think that the tides of influence that exist within our mental and emotional states as well of, you're feeling maybe a certain type of way, and it almost feels like you can become more, pulled into that even deeper, as opposed to being able to recognize that state and maybe stop it or pull yourself out of it, or lean in further to when things are good and you're going in the right direction.
Yeah, totally. This can go, like you said, it's going to be kind of two opposite spectrums of kind of where our base, you could say personalities or things that we're influenced by, like at a biological or a social level. And then there's the complete opposite, which could be where you are living by your own values and every action and behavior you're embodied is just to your core how you're living.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the spectrum that we're going to be discussing.
Yeah.
And then there's also like challenges that come in between there.
Yeah. We looked at a certain psychological theory from a while back, which is the early 1900s, that talked about, it's called positive personality disintegration. They talked about these different levels of the human being personality wise. And level one being that, it's not necessarily you're living by your own values. You're very much determined by society's values and what's ethically right.
Or biological responses of I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, tired, etc.
Normal things.
Yep.
And then the other complete opposite side, like you mentioned, was this kind of maybe more evolved or higher personality that is totally operating based off of their intrinsic values. Everything they do is, based around that. And then there's a spectrum of where we sit in between there.
Totally. And I don't think we're going to be going over these levels.
No.
I just wanted to ask questions on maybe is it beneficial to live in, one state over the other? Where would you find yourself living?
Yeah.
Is it important to, live in that higher state? How could we get there too? Those are the things I'd be curious about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that the reason that this was so appealing to me, and I kind of stumbled upon that theory or law. I didn't, know what I was really searching for until it came up, but it was helpful. It kind of talked about how level 2, which if it's level 1 to level 5, level 2, and I think this is a battle that I struggle with a lot, but I'm sure people at home is you have this understanding of maybe it is what you really want to do. we've talked about it before, purpose or what makes you feel, most alive or, most challenged. But it already goes maybe a little bit against the grain of what everyone else is doing, climbing the corporate ladder, doing something that is very maybe common within society or biologically, right? It's like, okay, if I want to make more money, if I want to live a better life, I have to keep doing these things. And so a lot of times in that theory, they talk about people that are in that level too, do this kind of yo-yo of going back and forth between, oh man, like I should just do what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
And that's hard for me.
Yeah. I've seen myself, yo-yo in that sense too, of where there's periods or times or stretches in my life where I'm extremely driven by my values.
Yeah.
Where it's very family, friends, health, etc. And then I've also seen hey, let's just do what, society's doing. Let's do what is social or what I'm interested in biologically. So it's like those are the questions, and it's going to be tough to carve your own path. And I think that's what this podcast is about, is giving yourself agency. So kind of getting to that higher level is going to be getting very uncomfortable with having uncertainty and sticking to what you believe in type thing.
Completely. And that theory kind of talks about the more you go, the more you're in line with your values, the more you're going to face, people, family, friends, external factors. They're going to say, oh, that person's weird or different for choosing that lifestyle, that, kind of belief system. And then I think we can flip it too, like internally, and I think they're very much correlated. Do you ever feel like, you have this battle within yourself of, you're waking up for your job or you're, at the office in the afternoon and you're like, God, this is what it is. This is it. And sometimes or maybe you're driving home and you're going back to your apartment or, your house with maybe a very, it's a very consistent kind of pattern that you have where it's like, man, all right, kind of a longing for internally, like, I guess this is just what it is, as opposed to maybe carving your own path and doing something very outside of the box of what you've been doing.
Yeah, totally. I think that, being at the age you and I are, like college, we were told was the time you go out and explore and you'll figure out exactly what you want to do.
Yeah.
You're going to have all the answers after that. And I think that I've realized it's just more questions, not answers.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of growth is like being able to just face them, and we won't really know the right answer. Say it's your career, and it's common to question that, like relationships to friendships. Should I be doing this thing? Should I be doing something else? That is going to be consistent no matter what. So I think it's more keep tackling those questions and approaching it with values or a purpose that you can lean on. Yeah. And if you can do your best within that, everything else should fall into place from there.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I just remember from an old job too that I used to have. It was a tough kind of sales position that was a lot of like cold calling and stuff like that. But I remember too internally, and we might get into the hows about this later, but do you ever feel like, or had you ever heard from coaches, bosses, etc.? I think you will have experiences with this, but like when those negative thoughts do come in, like, man, like I can't, like you've been trying to get a sale or something, it's just not coming. Or maybe you're down in a game, 2 goals.
Sure.
They talked a lot about, like immediately when you feel that way, almost like recognizing it, noticing it, and getting back to, okay, what's the purpose? Like, why am I doing this, et cetera? And I was wondering if you thought that, I know that does have its advantages, right? But also I'm interested in feeling the way that I feel too. And I think that's a
Yeah.
big question of like, okay, do you let those emotions inside of you kind of sweep you away, or do you fight them?
I think it's very important there's a right time and place.
Yeah.
Like say we can give the soccer example because
Yeah.
it's just a little more clear. Like you make a bad pass, you give the ball away. In that moment, are you supposed to sit with that feeling of, man, I'm a disappointment. I let my team down.
Yeah. I messed up.
I can't continue.
Yeah.
Like, or do you like, shit, that happened. Like, it's the game is live. Like, all I can do is move on and try and make that next impact of winning the ball back, doing my job.
Completely.
So that's like that real time moment, but that's not something that we need to forget.
Yeah.
There is a time to reflect on what mistakes were made, how you felt, and this applies to so many things.
Yeah.
Where there is a time and place for each thing, where there is a time to reflect, to feel, to grow, to see what went wrong.
Yeah.
And there is a time to, hey, we have to forget about this right now. All we can do is control the next moves ahead.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. I think that because we had been in that environment, like, you said, and sports is a really easy one to like put a physical, when things like that happen. I think that we do so little. I would say that a lot of people maybe within their day, maybe something does go wrong, like the pass example, or you give the ball away in soccer. And I think that in that moment, because there is nobody coming to do film with you later,
Right.
You're an individual, you're an adult. Nobody's coming in to say, hey, it's okay. Like, let's pick it up. Let's win the rest of the day. It's so easy to almost let those things, and nobody's going to come to you and say, hey, let's talk about how that wasn't great later. We can get into this, like we said, the tides of influence of, oh man, shitty day, and that's just what today was, shitty.
Right. So it's that influence, I think, that is like kind of that line through, or that theme that we're questioning.
Yeah.
It's like, good or bad, you can let these things affect you.
Yeah.
You can let the positives affect you. You could also let these negatives affect you. Of a bad day, of someone's negative behavior, of just poor habits, of what your friends are doing, of what your work is doing, et cetera. So how are you going to let that impact you? And how can you be the gatekeeper to that of, hey, I'm going to let this in. I'm not going to let this in.
Yeah.
This is inspiring to me. This is something I should avoid, or someone I should avoid.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we have to do. What this topic is really about is like letting in versus keeping out, like protecting that for ourselves.
I think you're completely right. And I think that it's funny. I think for myself, and I'd be interested to see what you think, there's some things that, that are good habits that I can grow through really well. There's other things that I, like you said, like letting in or keeping out, that I have a harder time with. For example, right now, physical exercise, it's almost one of those things where I can know, even if I'm having a tough day, I need to do that just to like stay. But then, so like that's one example of it's a habit that I've created. But in other ways, if it's work or if it's something goes wrong, etc., your social life, your family life, whatever, that's harder for me, I think, right now, because I haven't been practicing the same way I have maybe physically of, hey, even when things don't go amazing, you got to keep those habits in place.
Right. It reminds me of I don't remember the specific topic. You might be able to help me, but really just the idea of like habit stacking your behaviors of like, if you have something that you're really good at, your example was, fitness, that you've built a good practice around. It's like, how can you create some of those habits in an area maybe where you're not so good on, let's say it's something to do with your work, or it's something to do, in your creative pursuits. How can you create a habit or form habits around those habits? That way you can at least propel yourself a little better. That way it's a lot easier for you to tackle.
It's automatic.
Yeah.
So how do we begin to, I think, you said it best when you're like letting in versus keeping out these tides of influence. How do we begin to like get better at it, distinguish, good things, bad things, etc.?
I think I think it's just a common thing that we always have to do is we have to like reflect on where we are. Reflect what's influencing you.
Yeah.
Is it the media that you're viewing on your phone? Is it the people you're surrounding yourself with?
Yeah.
Is it is it what you're watching? Is it what you're reading? So I think just think about what you are being influenced. How are you actually behaving now?
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the first and only first step in order to decide if you need to make changes.
Yeah. And I think like you said, it's almost recognizing and reflecting in the moments when you do feel that, oncome of, oh man, like,
sure,
something didn't go right, or I'm feeling a lack of motivation. I'm not feeling great. In that moment, can you kind of like immediately reflect and be like, okay, what am I doing right now? Did I get any sleep? Did I do the right things in the morning? And then can we go from there?
Yeah, totally. All right, what about another how after we've reflected?
Yeah, I think it's almost related to exactly what I was just saying. Is it's a lot of times it's developing this. We talked about it in there's these 5 stages, and the people that are the very best at it are always acting in line with their values. And we talk about this a lot in general on the podcast. So it's like if you can reflect, and then you can almost name out or kind of like put actions to those values. And we say this a lot when it's like, hey, if you want to be a podcaster, you have to do the things that podcasters do. If you want to be the very best, entrepreneur, you got to do what those people do. So I think a lot of it is looking at, okay, what's the values that I, live for? And then when those things do come on, those moments of insecurity or negative thinking, et cetera.
Yeah, turn to those and be like, hey, what would being honest look like? What would being, humble look like? Those were examples of values.
Yeah, and you can use different people that have been there before as examples and say, okay, if you want to be the best basketball player in the world, is LeBron, eating nachos on Saturday night? Probably not, And so that can help you when those influences are pulling at you like, man, I should do this. It's like, hey, okay, maybe, but also what's in line with who you are?
Yeah, I love that. So second one, what's in line with who you are? Kind of look at your values.
Yeah.
I think that's a great how. I think the one on that there's going to be so much influence always in our lives of good and of positive and negative. We have to remember that we are the ones that can let that in. We can let that affect us or impact us greatly, for our lives. So is it the people that we're surrounding ourselves with? We can let those people in. We can also remove ourselves from things that we shouldn't be involved in.
Yeah.
Maybe it's poor habits, poor behaviors, etc. So look at yourself almost as a gatekeeper for the information that you're watching or reading or viewing or whatever. And all those external things, I think we just have to take a look at how impactful that is, for ourselves.
Yeah, you're completely right. I think one thing that's always helped me with that kind of idea is that there's inputs and outputs, and life is coming from you, right? So if you are constantly feeding yourself or filling yourself up with maybe not the best influences around you, you're only going to output not your best self.
Totally.
So you have to just think about those inputs and outputs and how you can give the most when people are feeding you positive, exciting ideas and, encouragement.
Yeah, love that. So for our whys, why are we talking about tides of influence today?
Yeah, I think that so much, and I feel like this lately, is that, I think that it's a time throughout the year, which is cyclical, happens all the time, where it can be this kind of snowball summer of, hey, you get going, and then you're just kind of like in this blur being pushed around like tides, right? You're like, okay, we're going here, we're doing this, and then we're doing that. And I almost forget a lot of times to stop, plant myself in one spot and say, okay, there are things that I want to do that are not the same as or in line with maybe me just floating and moving around like a jellyfish with the tides, Yeah. And so it really is for me, I think, to remind myself that you have to choose some things for yourself in order to be the happiest and most productive person, even to your friends, your family, or your work and yourself.
Totally. You have to do that for yourself first.
Yeah.
Similar. Really, I think it is that yo-yoing back and forth between, what is right, what's wrong. For me, I think it's, I do question, what's right.
Yeah.
Am I doing the right things? Am I, in the right career? Am I doing, the right, am I surrounding myself with the right people? So it's those questions that I ask myself, and I think it's really important to remember that I can create my own values, I can create my own life, and from having these conversations and living within those, the direction will point itself out for me.
Yeah. No, I love it. Let's do a quick recap. So today we talked about tides of influence.
Yeah.
We kind of got into some different theories and the external versus the internal of, your friends, maybe your family, different influences in society that maybe you get pulled towards. And then internally, kind of the battle and struggle with, okay, am I doing the right thing? What feels good, mentally, emotionally within myself?
Yep.
And am I just doing that maybe because everybody else, it makes most sense to everybody else?
Right, totally. Then we got into our how. So our first how is really just to reflect on the inputs and outputs of our lives.
Yeah.
Like, how are we living? What are the inputs that we're filling ourselves up with?
Yeah.
The media, the books, what we're watching, the people we're surrounding ourselves with, the behaviors that we're living. We have to understand where we are if we want to make change. Maybe you don't.
Yeah.
And then the second was really just, create values or a vision for yourself that you can live within. And from having that, you can then answer those questions a little more clear.
Yes.
Completely. And then lastly was just to a reminder that you are that gatekeeper. You can let in and keep out the influences you want in your life.
Yeah, you have agency within creating your own reality.
Yeah.
Completely. Then we got into the whys, and I just talked a little bit about sometimes it can feel so unsettling and unnerving to kind of blow in the wind and with the tide of what everyone else is doing, and you don't feel like you have those hard planted values. And so for me, it's about really putting those values in place and then choosing when, I want to go with the tide and when I don't.
Right, totally. And mine was similar. I think that yo-yoing back and forth, really on this topic of talking about these phases, was just a reminder that it's okay to have these questions. And by having these questions about what is right, what's wrong, and remembering that values are important can help me find those answers.
Yeah, completely.
And I think that wraps another week of
What is Humans. Thanks, guys.